We're back with Therapy is Dope with Alicia and Laura, and today we also have Lee with us, which we're excited about. We were just talking a little offline, and Lee was telling me about launching his website in 1999.
Last
I know.
century.
It,
1900s. That's
looks
crazy.
like that couldn't be true.
It is very true.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got where you're at today?
I knew in college that I wanted to be a therapist, and so I launched into, that means going to grad school, and for me, two masters and a PhD is what that meant. And I kept on going. Originally, I was trained as an individual therapist, but I was really intrigued with the systems approach of marriage and family therapy, and started working predominantly with couples pretty early on. And kind of looking back at my childhood, my parents are still happily married, but I had an uncle and a couple of aunts that really set the trend for the family and how many bad relationship things could happen. And I just remember watching the explosions go on and got intrigued on kind of what makes a marriage work. Like, why are my parents doing well? Why were my grandparents doing well? Why was my uncle going through marriage after marriage and my two aunts not successful? And that began to be where my practice was. And
Mm.
then I started asking the question, like, can we do better than what we're doing? Because I started seeing the statistics on marriage therapy, of which I was practicing, and thought there's got to be a better approach. So I actually shifted as I was finishing. So you'll feel sad for my poor wife. We had a very small house when I'm in grad school. We were, and then she's also a therapist, and she was at that point practicing, but in a small house, two little kids running around. I have my desk at one end of our main room that we all were living in, our primary living area. We had bedrooms, but the primary living room. And that was where I was writing my dissertation. So
Oh,
stacks of books everywhere. Yeah. And so I'm sitting there, she's doing something, and I was reading an article. This was back in the mid 90s about coaching. And I turned to her and I said, "This is kind of how I do things." And she said, "Well, what are you going to do now that you've gone through all of this?" And I didn't see that it negated that. It actually expanded the options. And so I began to shift. But as you said, my website went live in 99, all the way back last century. And that still is something that is available. My Save the Marriage system has been available since 99. So a little over 26 years now.
wow.
Yeah. How many marriages have you saved?
So it was easier to count that before we started having, people all over doing it. But the program has been used. I think now we're in the 90 thousands of people who have gotten the program and used it. So
Wow.
they don't all report to me, but I do get a lot of reports back, and I do still do coaching with people. I wish I had a count. I just can tell you how many times it's been downloaded now. We also have the Save the Marriage podcast, which I just looked yesterday. We're at 3.9 million downloads. So there's another group of people.
Wow,
That's
that's
super rewarding.
It is. And the bigger thing is, I just feel one of the things my parents raised me on is leaving the world a better place. So take me out of the equation. And I'm proud of the fact that people do something to improve their lives. Just because that's so important in our world these days. And so that's the bigger reward, is just watching people who say, yeah, this matters to me and I'm going to do something about it.
Yeah.
okay. So first, I want to know what the degrees were in.
Yeah, all in therapy. So I did two masters that were my specialty was in pastoral counseling at that point, and so I did two
Okay.
degrees in that and a PhD in the same thing. And so my focus shifted along the way from individual work to family work, but the degrees themselves were two masters and then a PhD.
I remember when IFS first started becoming popular, I thought that it was the system's approach to family therapy. I was like, oh yeah, I already know about that.
Huh.
No, totally different.
Yes, very different.
Okay, so
There is a system there. I mean, they have the system. It's just
there,
in there.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
word system is still there.
Yeah.
Okay, so on what is the approach for saving the marriage?
So let me just say one of the things I noticed I was being taught was I was dealing with the symptoms of what people were bringing in. And I believe that there was something below the symptoms. So let's go back in time. And then we'll fast forward. Yeah, that's right. Little
Yeah.
special effects you can throw in. So back when people meet each other, you have
What?
this, yeah, all the way back to there, right? And so you find somebody and you go, wow, this person is really interesting. I want to get to know them better. And they do the same thing. Otherwise, it doesn't work out very well for most people, right? So you end up having this back and forth where you're building up the connection between you. And we can talk about it, but I believe there are three levels to that connection, three different types within that connection. So you're building up this connection in different ways, these three different ways. And at some point, you believe so strongly in that connection that you go, hey, let's make this for life. And go through what I think is an extremely short ceremony for what comes out of that. And because I remember I walked in going, okay, I'm single, and I walk out 45 minutes later and we're it for life. That's
Yeah.
quite a transformation. But that's what people do. And as they go back into life, because they've spent all of this energy on building their relationship, they're building their connection, they go, okay, we've got this. So let's hit the pause button on this. That's what I call the pause button marriage. Let's hit the pause button on this and let's put our energy into kids, career, friends, hobbies, interests, all these things that were kind of on the sideline a good bit for these other things. But it's okay because we've already got this. Like we've nailed this down. We don't have to worry about that. We'll get back to us. And so the pause button is what then creates the next step out. And it's not like they go, I think I'm going to disconnect from my spouse, but that's the effect.
Yeah.
I'm now moving into these other areas with the energy. And because they believe that they already have that love thing down, it'll be okay. Like suspended animation.
Right.
Just my observation, suspended animation doesn't seem to work out real well in science fiction or anywhere else, and it doesn't work out well in relationships. And so they go from these habits of connection to habits of disconnection that keep adding up.
Mm.
And for a while, they don't notice it because they have the momentum going in, like we're good, we're fine, we'll get back to us after. And it's always a little bit out in the future after my career is here, here, after the kids are out of diapers and school, out of school. I mean, it goes on and on. When we get retired, we'll come back to us. And by that time, there are two very different people who can't see how they got there anyway. But most people along the way before that start to get uncomfortable with it.
Mm.
And so then we start seeing the symptoms that bring people into therapy. And just observationally, a lot of therapy spends a lot of time on the symptoms and it becomes like whack-a-mole. You deal with that and it just pops up somewhere else because they're not getting to that underlying issue.
All right, so if we go back to the connection part, you said there was three ways that we're
Way
connecting.
back there. Yeah.
I assume one of them is like attraction, but I have no idea. What are the three things that we're connecting on?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, and attraction is on, I mean, at least initially, is probably a physical, wow, that person is interesting, right? So let's go through the actual connection pieces because these are um, this is how we connect with anyone. So I just start off with that. These are three levels of connection that are true in any relationship. It's just what that relationship is about that changes the dynamics of it. So we start off with dogs nearby. And so let's go with dogs. Dogs understand pretty much one level of connection. That's physical connection, like loving touch. Humans do too, right? Loving touch is a way of connecting. So giving hugs and all of that. And so, when I'm sitting on the couch, she's up against me, meaning she trusts me and wants to be close by and feels warm fuzzies or whatever when I scratch her. I don't think when I talk to her about my day that she much understands what else is going on other than this is person talking, but that's the physical connection. And that's warm-blooded creatures kind of do that. But us humans who have a couple of other things we can do, like think about things with words and remind ourselves of things that have happened, have these other possibilities. And so the next level is emotional connection. And emotional connection is kind of two big pieces of it is feeling like someone gets you and you get them and that they support you and you support them. So getting and supporting are the two primary things we do and verbally and non-verbally. And the proof of the fact that this happens in every relationship is you are both of you have been kind of nodding along when I'm saying something. That's non-verbal. Okay, we get that, right? We're with you on that. At some point you may go, and I'll know that we're at a different place. But
I'm
right
gonna start
now,
making weird
yeah,
faces now to throw
yeah,
you off.
that's right. And I'll go, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not what couples do, right? They stop having those conversations. And so I talk about the shift as being kind of invisible because couples feel like they're busy, so they don't have time for those deeper conversations, and those so they go from rapport with each other to report.
Mm,
And by that, I mean in the evenings when you say, "How was your day?" It's answered with a, "Here was my schedule,"
Right.
which has nothing to do with how the day was. It's just a report. So the communication for many couples ends up being on that report level. What the kids did, what I did. That's the place. And so there's not a whole lot of getting to that or supporting to that. So that piece begins to fall away. For couples who are doing that, though, that's the sense. The nonverbal, another example, my wife, I remember when our kids were young, now they're adults, but they would do something and we would kind of look at each other and give each other the look and we would both, oh, you get this too, right? We're in this together. Nonverbal, but we knew we were in it together. We could have a conversation about that. And so the verbal also. So those two
Question.
levels. Yes.
Because we're talking
I see
about
that,
like
Anthony. And
nonverbals,
yes.
uh, what role does attunement play in healthy relationships and healthy marriages?
So how we get to attunement is in these conversations and in the physical connection. So that one of the ways you can tell when somebody is in trouble is because they don't feel any attunement, right? That's missing. So they're in the same place, but nothing it feels like it's fitting together.
Hmm.
Does that
So like
answer?
when you, yes, it does. I guess the follow-up, I suppose,
Uh-huh.
is I I'm curious around like the nonverbals and the verbals because that's
Yeah.
where, we live in kind of a sadly emotionally disconnected world where most people are disconnected from their emotions by design. So then when you
Yeah.
come home to a family where there's lots of stimulation, that can be overwhelming. So people can stay disconnected so they can say all the right things, but they might not be able to reach their partner because their nervous system is so detached in this like fight and flight response. So I'm curious how you address that in the, save the marriage system or what you've seen in your private coaching, either way.
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the mistakes I see people do is try to use my approach when they are dysregulated. And they're like, I'm not getting anything back. And I'm like, that's because the way you're moving is, we pick up on that. And so we start off with a lot of work on finding regulation. I have a couple of units. I have a program that's, for people who want more training. And I have several different trainings and units on how to regulate yourself because that's so important. They start with that and then they can move back into connection because you're right. I mean, we live in a very anxiety ridden world, and our way of dealing with it is often instead of finding a way to regulate, to hide from it, and that often hides us from our spouse too. So I watch many couples tell me that they're at home in the evening and they are just like this on opposite ends of the couch, and this is their attempt to calm themselves,
Right.
which doesn't do a lot to calm ourselves anyway, but that's the attempt. So yes, I think one of the things I've often done with people when I'm coaching is to help them recognize where they are emotionally, like
Mm.
to see what's coming out. And so a quick explanation for people is that what comes out of people that looks like the anger is often because they feel the threat and the fear And so our outward expression of that is often in repulsive kind of push away ways. That's what anger does. It pushes away. And people don't even recognize they're doing it. Sometimes they think that they are talking about what's difficult for them. And just so I've had people in my office and one saying, I'm trying to tell you what hurt me. And I'm like, that's not how that feels. That, it's coming out in anger. So let's talk about how to perceive that. So it's a sender receiver question. Can somebody see that when the anger is coming their way, that there is likely hurt, fear, or threat behind that with the spouse? So their immediate response is, oh, I wonder what this is about. How do
Mm.
we get back to that? But also, what am I putting out there? I wonder what is is emerging from me when I think that I am being sensitive. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what 80% of communication is nonverbal, right? And like
Yeah.
I
I
will say
mean,
that a little like probably doesn't look good on me, but like I love watching reality TV shows sometimes. I don't know why. I don't know why, but it's entertaining as hell to me.
sure.
And I'll hear someone like defending what they said, but like what they aren't seeing is how they said it was so aggressive
Yeah.
that no one can hear it. And I've seen this in like my family where like I call it the two levels of vulnerability where there's like protected vulnerability where they're
Yeah.
speaking about it in a confident way. So the observer or the other person in the conversation can't pick up the vulnerability because it just sounds like this is what I'm feeling. This is where I am. She feels this person feels vulnerable when she's sharing it, but because she's not emoting the vulnerability in an attempt to protect her, she often gets missed and then she feels hurt. And then she has this
Mm,
other level of like softer vulnerability where she's connected to her embodied feeling and she receives the appropriate kind of expected response when someone's being vulnerable. So the whole nonverbal conversation in this, and like I appreciate you specifying that in the system you start with a lot of regulation because I don't think people realize how much they say when they're dysregulated.
and we carry that around. So how do we fall in love? It's that softer vulnerability. You don't fall in love with the harder protected
Oh,
vulnerability, which so then when you're feeling unprotected, the armor's up and then you're bouncing off each other. So absolutely your observation. I mean, it's true in every relationship. And we're trying to decide where do we put our vulnerability? And that
so how do you
happens so
observe that?
deep.
How do you observe that in yourself? Like the dissonance, I suppose, between what you're feeling and trying to communicate versus the nonverbals that are attached to it.
Yeah, a lot of that is somatic. Like, what is my body telling me? And that is a cutoff, I think, for a lot of people. I have sat there and helped people to, tell me where your gut is. Oh gosh, it's tensed. Where your fists, where your jaw is, and those are signs that we are at that protective place when we are clenched because our our emotions are leading our body to be ready for a physical encounter. And so whenever we feel like we're ready for that physical encounter, we're likely to be outside of that softer vulnerability. I have a friend of mine who puts pulsometers on the couples when he's talking to them.
That's cool.
That's a
And when they
gotcha.
go, yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's his training. And so when it crosses 100, it beeps at them and they go, oh, that's a clue. How did I miss the clue that I was ramping up to that?
Ah,
And so it's an immediate feedback loop. And I said, how is that? And he said, for some couples, it's beep, 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 beep. And it takes them a while before they finally go, oh, what we're doing here is causing this.
yeah.
And it's outside of our awareness because we get caught up in the, I'm going to win here. I got to be right.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Thank you so much for that deviation. What was the third? You told us the two. Sorry,
Yeah.
backtrack.
No, no, this is great. So the third one is what I call spiritual connection. When I say this, people are like, "Oh, you mean religion?" And I actually do not. It's our deepest part, of which religion often tells us something about our values and that. So sure, that's included, but that's not limited to that. Um, what's interesting about that level is it's one that a lot of people have, I think, just kind of lumped in as, "Oh, we're emotionally connected." But it's the one that repeatedly I would hear stories about where they fell in love. And that was that connection. So for a long time, I saw couples, if they were getting married in 7 different places of faith where my office was 3 visits for them. They had to come through. So I saw a lot of people before they got married. And that was a frequent part of their story. They would tell me about how they found each other and began to build their relationship, and they knew they liked this person. And then they had this long, deep conversation that often started late at night and went to early hours of the morning, where they talked about their hopes, their dreams, their fears, what their childhood was like, all these bits of information that they likely didn't share with anyone else up until then, at least at that depth. And then they say, and that's when I knew I loved them.
Mm,
And you talk about vulnerability. When you share that layer of yourself, you are choosing to expose some pretty deep layers to yourself. So that anchors the fall in love piece, because now you know so much at depth of this person. And then couples stop having that conversation. Like,
mhm.
as if what they thought, what they valued, what they wanted whenever they met continues regardless. And so because it gets lumped in, many times they lose the fact that layer is important to the relationship.
Mm,
When
that
you
makes
were
sense.
saying that, all I could think about was trauma bonding. Like a lot of people will immediately share their trauma, and they're like, people will tell me, "Oh, well, I feel like they need to know this about me." And I'm like, maybe we just save that until we know if this person is safe or not.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and you're talking about a kind of that level where maybe somebody is not clear enough with themselves of how they need to be in connection before they share, and that certainly can create some interesting dynamics along the way. So let's go with a lot of the couples I was talking to who would have gone, yeah, this person is safe, and they were correct that the person was safe to have a conversation with, but it is a bonding thing. If somebody tells you, I mean, having heard lots of deep, dark stories from people, that is a bonding experience for them to share and for you to experience, regardless. It's just part of that human nature.
True.
Yeah.
I agree. Um, there's a joke in the lesbian community that that's why lesbians move their relationships along so quickly because they have no problem opening up to each other in that way, in that vulnerable way, sharing all of these deep things about themselves. And then they're like, okay, yeah, let's move in together.
Yeah, we've done it.
Yeah. I have like 7 questions, but I'll start with self-worth. This is something that I feel like majority of people typically struggle with once they kind of like get into adulthood. And I've seen in my coaching, like people talking about their partner and they're the one who struggles with self-worth. And then I've seen also when they have kind of reclaimed their worth and their partner hasn't, and how that kind of creates this incongruency. Can you speak to that, like in general, what you see in terms of the relational dynamic when one person does feel like they are worthy versus another doesn't, or when two people do, when two people don't, like how that kind of systematically impacts each other?
So let's start with what happens when you have that tendency and then the pause button gets hit, right? Because now the question is, I thought I mattered to this person and I don't feel like I do anymore. And that does trigger that self-worth. I think that is a kind of the part of the being human, is how do we assess our own self-worth? How do we think others assess our worth? And we were calculating that on a regular basis. And in a strong relationship, there is actually a feedback loop there, because you're saying you matter so much to me, you're important to me. And have you seen the recent book Mattering?
Mm-mm.
I've seen it. I haven't read it yet. It's in my cart.
It's a great
I
book.
can't do it until I make space on the bookshelf.
I understand. It's a great book because the person boils it down to the human experience of wanting to matter is so deeply within us, that when we feel like we don't matter, we feel like we've lost our self-worth. And her thing is from a evolutionary psychology perspective. If we didn't matter, if our ancestors didn't matter, they were at risk. at
Right.
mortal risk, right? And so we carry that with us, and it's always in that place of question: do I matter to this person? Which brings us back to those three levels of connection when they're happening. That's part of what helps us understand we matter to this other person and they matter to us because we have that connection. Now, back to my what I think is what drives a lot of this. They hit the pause button, and suddenly those connection points fall away, leading them to ask the question, do I matter in this? Do I matter in this relationship? Do I matter to this person? Does what I do matter at all? And it brings back the same vulnerabilities that are just kind of human nature in a way that feel now pointed about this I don't matter to this person in particular.
Mm, interesting. When I this isn't necessarily a question, but just kind of a ball to throw back at you.
Hmm.
What I hear, like the language of mattering, and I do agree with you. I also hear the language of like not enough, like I'm not enough for them, or it's never enough. So like I always associate that with self-worth. Do you see that as well? Does that intersect with the mattering?
It does. So it's been a while since I suggested this, but I believe there are three core fears, and they fit into the mattering thing. The fear of not being good enough, not having enough, and not being loved enough. And I think there are probably some evolutionary pieces to that too, because
Mhm.
that would have been important to be good at something, to have
Yeah.
enough to make it through the winter, and to be loved enough to be protected. So I think all of those fit into the mattering question. And so when I put it to those three questions, I hear that very frequently from people. Like, so am I enough for this person? Am I good enough to make this relationship make a difference? And then I hear the one, if there's a threat to the relationship, will I have enough to survive if this goes south? Right. And so all of those get triggered in the midst of a marriage crisis and raise those questions of, you know, do I, am I, will I? And that does get back to that. What am I worth as a person? You know, if this person that I have vowed to be there with the rest of my life, and through one of the things I think people kind of go through the vows really quickly and forget about, you've said good days, bad days, rich days, poor days, sick days, healthy days. There are not any days left. So
Right.
you've just made this vow through all of these days. And then you're going, but wait, maybe they don't feel that back, or it's not going to happen, right? Something is wrong here. And suddenly everything comes crashing around. So I think a piece of to hold out is a lot of people who come to my program are the ones who are going, but I want this to work. I don't get many people coming to my program who are like, see ya, I'm out of here. Um, they don't
Right.
they don't tend to listen to my podcast or have any interest in finding out how to save my marriage. And I'll have people say, "Tell me, what can I give to my spouse?" I'm like, "That's not where they are. Right? You can't do that because that's not where they are." So they're coming in with a lot of those fears of maybe I'm not good enough, maybe this won't work out, maybe I can't be loved, maybe I'm not worth it. And so that is a lot of that internal work. I think the mistake people make, though, is going, I'll wait till I'm confident about these things before I take action.
Mm.
And I don't think confidence is the lead ever.
Mm-mm. No, I think confidence is the outcome of engaging,
It is.
right?
Yeah. That's the
Uh,
final piece you get. Yeah. After the quest is over, you get granted confidence.
okay, so flip the lens a little bit.
Hmm.
How, based on your experience, when would you suggest couples do split? Like take abuse and things out of the equation. Like those are obviously like not healthy. And I've seen this with like some of my aunts and uncles where I'm like, we're all like, you guys should definitely not be
Yeah.
together.
Please do.
But like, I've been noticing with a lot of my clients where like they're having these conversations and like I'm curious what do you see when you're like, yeah, this probably isn't repairable? Obviously, something you mentioned was like if one person at least is like, yeah, I'm not interested, right?
So, well, if one person is not interested, that doesn't mean it's over. It
Okay.
just means that the effort is going to be sitting on one person for a while. It's not going to be a joint effort. So, I always think of the kind of votes, thumbs up. If both people are going thumbs up, you know, then that's easy. I've long said that a bad therapist can't get in the way of two people who say, "Yes, I'm going to save my marriage," but a great therapist is going to struggle if one person is going absolutely not no way, no how to get them back together. So here's the difficult part. I think it's hard often in the midst of the crisis to see what's possible without the effort to see what might happen. So uh, where I live, we're in a pretty severe drought.
Mm.
And Clem and I take a walk every single morning, and I'm always looking at what stress is happening around. Walk around the little lake that's near us, and I'm looking at the trees that are dropping leaves and they shouldn't be, and all of these things. And so the will eventually kill a lot of these plants. But if they get rained on, a lot of them that look like they're in bad shape will suddenly come back to life because there is still life in there. And you don't know it until you water it, and you don't know it until you work on the connection. That I wish I had a dime for every time I get an email from someone who says, "I will do anything you tell me to do if you can guarantee me I can save my marriage." And I'm happy to give the reverse guarantee. I can guarantee what happens if you don't take action, right? Because you're
Sure.
already headed on this path. The drought continues and it's too much damage. So then there is the question of, well, then how long? And that's the difficult one.
Yeah.
So I had a person a while back who said, I just think it's over. I've been working on this for a week. And I was like,
Oh,
a
oh
week?
A
my.
week?
And then I've had people who are like, I've been working on this for, 15, 20 years, and I'm going to keep pushing. I'm like, there comes a point somewhere between a week and
Yeah.
15, 20 years to say I've done what
Small
I'm willing to
range.
do. Right. Yeah, it's quite a range. And so it's kind of at a maximum. What I've never wanted to do is help people limp a marriage along indefinitely. That just doesn't do it. So I wanted people to be able to save their marriage and restore it to something that they both would really treasure, even if right now only one sees that as a possibility. But at a bare minimum, I want to make sure that people can walk away going, I did what I could and I feel good. I can look in the mirror and say, I did what I could. Regret, I mean, that's the thing. I saw so many years people walking away with regret. That's tough because you can't undo what caused the regret. You can get through it, but you can't undo it. And so I always want people to go, okay, I gave it my shot. I did what's here. I followed that plan. It didn't work, and I feel good about that.
I
That's
feel
fair.
like most people I work with in couples will say, I have to try everything. I feel like I have to try everything. And
Hmm.
even when they have no intention of making the marriage work, they're like, we got to at least try therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, and for so one of the things that often happens in therapy is that somebody is dragging someone into therapy, which pretty
Yeah.
much kills the process. So that's part of what I got frustrated with therapy for is, you can't do marriage therapy unless you have the two people there. And if somebody's dragging them in, hoping the therapist will have some magic spell that will cause them to go, oh, yes, let's work on this, they usually the person actually becomes more convinced that nothing can be done because they're busy convincing the therapist that nothing can be done. I'm like, well, let's not do that. Let's deal with what we can with the person who is willing to work on it, knowing that, if you change one part of the system, it does affect the other parts of the system. You can't always guarantee how it will, but you will see a change.
That's
Do
fair.
you think that there are deal breakers?
Um, Yes, and those deal breakers, unfortunately, I don't think there's an objective list of them because I have seen couples recover from things that I would go, yeah, it's a deal breaker for me, and they recover and get there. And then there's some that I'm like, this shouldn't be that big of a deal, and for them, it's the deal breaker. So yeah, sure. A lot of people point to affairs.
Mhm.
And so I wrote a book about how to recover from an affair because I also know that statistically speaking, the majority of people who go through an affair do stay married. And the question is, do they recover? or
Right.
do they just stumble forward? And so part of my framing of that is that there are two pieces that lead to an affair. One is a disconnected relationship because we need connection. We're going to look for it somewhere, and there are lots of ways that we might find it, and one happens to be in an affair. So there is the disconnection in the relationship, and then that some person did not hold the boundaries of the relationship to protect it. So those two pieces, one, that holding the boundaries rest with the person who had the affair. The disconnected relationship, that was a joint process of them being in that disconnected relationship. And so for lots of people that I've worked with, they've realized that the affair happened after the disconnection. It doesn't let the person off the hook, but it helps them come back and say, okay, we need to work on the connection if we want to work through and secure this relationship.
Yeah. There's something Esther Perel has said is like you're married to like 3 to 5 people in your life.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the same person, sometimes it's different people.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean it makes sense. Like we're evolutionary creatures, we're always evolving, and like when you even once you introduce kids to dynamic, both parties hopefully go through some type of evolution to then, shape their habits and whatnot around creating a healthy container for kids. And then when kids get older, when women go through menopause, like all of these are obvious transitions, and like the hormonal changes require men and women alike to embody a new personality-ish
Hmm.
within their vessel. And it's like
Yeah.
that, what the Gottman say is like continuing to date and get to know that kind of the pause, right? Like making sure you're still investing in those habits.
Yeah. I had someone interview me yesterday. And so we started, he said, you married? I'm like, yeah, been married 38 years. And a little while later, I said, I think my marriage has gone through probably 6 marriages that I can count just quickly. And he said, wait, I thought you said you were married 38 years. I'm like, I mean, those 6 marriages
Yeah,
were the same person. We just
yeah,
had to keep reworking how that was going to go because you go through the changes of, no kids and both being in school, and then kids and getting out of school and into careers. And then as the kids were launching, I mean, every stage of kids, I think, brings a new challenge to it. And whether you're going to be there together, and then once the kids are gone, there's a whole new stage. And then we moved 4 years ago to a whole new location. Those are different stages that require different relating along the way, not different love, but a different way of understanding each other and what's going on and making sure that we're connected through that process.
yeah. Uh, Something Arthur Brooks said, I'm curious. He said that, so do you know who Arthur Brooks is? The happiness scientist from Harvard.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
Has said something on his podcast about like statistically speaking, happy marriages include a woman that feels adored and a man that feels respected.
Hmm.
Does that feel true? Any insights?
So yes, there's another author who's talked about love and respect, like that. And it's the same kind of thing that men need respect. Um, I think that some ways if there's a Venn diagram, I think we
Okay.
all want to feel respected and we all want to feel loved. And what feels more that way may vary some with gender. I'm curious on whether that keeps holding true as generations come forward, because I think a lot of that has been rooted in learning. And so I'm curious. I'm not saying it's not true now. I'm just curious if that really holds true going forward. I think that this other author talks about the fact that, we talk about unconditional love. Why don't we talk about unconditional respect? And when I've talked about that with people, they're like, you got to earn my respect. And I'm like, okay, are you going to do that with love? You got to earn my love, or can we be respectful and loving as our set points?
Right.
Mm.
It's kind of like, do you start from a space of trust or do you make people earn trust? And
Yeah.
it's ironically, I learned the best lesson about trust in like an entrepreneur book about like whether you make someone earn it or you give it, you're gonna get hurt. Like your trust is gonna be broken again either way. It's just what you're investing more in based on whether you give it or whether you make people earn it. Like it just creates a different energetic container. And
Yeah.
I think it's true with love and vulnerability and respect as well.
Yeah, and so when I've talked about trust with people, I've talked about that as a gift. And you've got to decide what the value is of that gift, right? They're not going to. I've watched people like you've got to earn my love, and the cost of that to earn it is so sky high. There's no way it'll ever happen. And then I watch people who trust at the drop of a hat, only to have to do it again and again and again because they keep having it set aside. So I see it as a gift that people have to decide and then to ask the question, are they doing things that are worthy of that gift?
Mm.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah.
Have a question on the respect front, and I am with you that I'm curious if that changes with generations. It's hard to tell, honestly, because
And like swiping. It does it change with swiping and like the
Uh,
online dating versus in person. But go
yeah,
ahead, Alicia.
that's a good point. Um, One of the common complaints that I hear from men in couples is it's just your tone. It's your tone when you talk to me. And for me, as a woman, I feel like that's asking too much. Like you're asking me to never have a tone with you because it feels disrespectful to you.
hmm.
Like how fragile is your ego? And that might sound really wrong, and I'm fully willing to acknowledge that, but I'm curious what your perspective as a dude is on that complaint.
As a
um,
dude.
yeah. So there are a couple of pieces to this that I think are. So I did jujitsu for a while, and I remember this person. It was pretty. He and I were having a conversation, and I'm like, you know, why do you think people get into fights? And now we're going to just do a little sideline that this is out men fighting each other. And he said it's always about respect. And I'm like, don't you think that you have to let that happen? Like you have to allow yourself to be disrespected?
Mm,
And he was like, "Yeah, absolutely." Because I could choose to say, "Okay, that tone is coming from a place of frustration," or lots of other things, or I can say, "You're being disrespectful." One is about what's coming from the other person. The other is about what I'm imposing upon it.
Mhm.
And so my thing with this person was, nobody can make you feel disrespected unless you accept that.
mm,
And in a relationship, that is a feedback loop, though. Like, what's that tone about? Can you tell me? And I always think it's interesting that if I were to say, what's that tone about? I've already labeled something instead of going, your voice sounds tense. Giving some descriptors on it is a lot more helpful. Like when I'm talking to people about boundaries, when somebody's is raising their voice at you, don't say you may not yell at me because then you'll get into a debate about what a yelling
What?
thing looks like, as opposed to you're raising your voice. Please don't raise your voice. That's a descriptive. And so being able to say, what is that tone about? And being curious. So we talked about this earlier on about curiosity. I think that is such a fundamental piece for people. And being curious about what that tone is about means that you're able to describe what it is. So to go a little further in this, when people are disconnected, one of the things that happens is they lose their empathy with that person.
mm,
And so many times I've suggested to people that the way back to empathy is curiosity, that is the starting point. When they'll say, I cannot feel empathy for this person. Okay, can you feel curiosity for what's going on with that person, with what drives that? Curiosity is a choice.
Mhm.
And if you spend a lot of time in curiosity, you will eventually land on empathy again.
Mhm. I
hmm.
love that, which Alicia knows. One of my like, what are the words I say all the time? Experiment and curiosity. Is that what they're? And it's because like I feel like people don't realize sometimes we need to take bridges to where we want to go,
Mm,
right? Like, I use this a lot with self-compassion work and like Chris and Neff work about like self-kindness versus self-judgment. Like if you, and I give the analogy of like if you think you're overweight, you can't just start telling your brain you're skinny and it's going to believe you. It's going to be like, you're full of shit. So like if you're being an asshole to your brain, you can't just be like, no, you don't suck. Your brain's not going to believe you. But if you take the common humanity bridge of like, am I the only human being who ever talks shit to
mm,
myself? Am I the only
mm,
human being who ever struggles with this? It almost like I feel the downshift even in those questions because it's like I'm not alone in this. And then you go into the kindness. It's like the bridge of common humanity. similarly, when with empathy, it's the bridge of curiosity of like, why could this person be struggling?
Hmm.
What if I had to think of any single reason why they might be struggling with what I'm presenting that does not minimize what I'm experiencing? Why? Because, like, let's be honest, whether you're giving a tone or receiving a tone, it's a triggering nervous system response, right? And that's why regulation becomes a key component. It's also a emotional response. So there's
Hmm.
a vulnerability component to it. It's just a matter of where the regulation is within it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and I think that's why I really appreciate the regulation first because we fight the hardest with the people we love the most.
Because
And we, I
what
think we
matters
forget,
there, right? I mean, for a lot of people, if they say something, I'm going to go, whatever, that's you. If it's
right.
somebody close to me, that feels like a direct reflection, like they know me enough. And so we hold that differently, and therefore we have more triggers with that for sure.
Yeah. I had one last question and then Alicia, you can take it. I know you said like about continuing to get to know each other and things of that nature. Are there any like essential conversations you think couples should be having every day or week besides how was your day?
And not giving a report.
Right. Right.
Yeah. I'm not sure about a prescriptive, but I do suggest that couples who are getting to a better place have what I call a partnership meeting once a week. And the partnership meeting covers really three different areas. One is there anything we need to talk about with finances? Because so many fights end up being about money. And by the way, if you're fighting about money, you're not fighting about money. That's
Yeah.
just the symptom, right? But that gets that off the plate of going, I didn't know this was coming up. Why didn't you tell me that? There's a point to tell. And schedule, because that's another nitpicker for people. I thought you were going to be here at 6. Why weren't you here till 6:30? And suddenly you have, you don't care about me kind of things instead of just let's make sure we're covering our schedule. The third one is how are we? And my warning is don't treat that as a therapy session without the therapist. How are we is more like in a business. How are things going? Well, we've got this problem. Let's solve that problem, not let's talk about whose psychology is involved in that problem, but let's solve that problem. So, how are we doing? Yeah, I kind of feel disconnected. Okay, what could we do to help that? That's a very different conversation than, well, that's because of what your parents did to you when you were a child. That's where it often ends up because we're such a psychologized society. But to be able to say, what could we do to help that? I would love to get away with you. Okay, let's plan that. That's a very short conversation that is solving a problem. And if people and that's not in a crisis situation. That's in a pretty healthy relationship to have that. So I put that as when somebody has been working to save their marriage and they get to the point where they're doing good, they just aren't gaining ground anymore. It's time to add some other tools in. And so that conversation is important.
Thanks.
My question goes back to the empathy piece, but it could fit in here. What if we're talking about somebody who knows where their problems come from, and so they have no problem explaining where they come from, but that still doesn't help me feel more empathetic because I feel like there's always this excuse or reason why you have whatever your response is. So at this point, it doesn't feel like something that I can be empathetic about. It feels like an excuse.
Hmm.
Where's the balance for that?
So then there's the secondary question about empathy of can you be empathetic about the fact that this person is stuck there for some reason?
Mm, okay.
That's so the empathy for the original, whatever they say is their go-to, and that keeps coming up and there's no change. I wonder what's keeping them stuck there. Like, why are they at that place? Because most people, when you get to that place, it's not like they're going, you know what? I think I'm going to just be miserable here. I'm just going to stick with this. They may use explanations of why they do it, but it's usually as a way of trying to deal with that, of finding a way around it. My wife never liked it when I would say it, but I always said that people would come to therapy for one of two reasons, either to change or to not change. Right. So they would often come in to tell the same story over and over and get somebody to, give a stamp of approval on what that is. But that's still a place of going, well, why are you wanting to be stuck there? Like, what is the conscious, subconscious choice to remain in that stuck place? So even the empathy can go to the secondary piece.
So, do you think that sometimes people choose to be miserable?
Um,
I do.
I think it fits a pattern for them that tells them something about themselves, whether they are consciously choosing it. I don't see many people who are consciously choosing it, but subconsciously living into that pattern for sure.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
That makes
that
sense.
that's what I see is people would say like, I just want to be happy or I just want this thing, and like they have all the resources, they have all the freedom, they can do it, they just won't do it, and they just want to complain about how they're unhappy, and it's like, okay, so like being in this space confirms something about their identity that they're not ready to confront yet.
Right. They won't let go of that. So
Yeah.
you keep chiseling down. And we talked about a little bit about this, when we talked about confidence,
Mm.
people are waiting for that moment when they go, yep, I can do this, rather than knowing that you've got to work yourself in. A friend of mine has done a lot of research on using the future self as a way of moving forward.
Hmm.
And because where you are now is you're there as an accumulation of Thomas Leonard, one of the coach people, said that we live, it's the present perfect. And he wasn't talking about a piece of language from grammar. The present perfect for him is this moment is a perfect representation of everything that's come up to right now. And the question is, how do you then move forward to a different place? And so my colleague and friend would say, you figure out what you want your future self to be and
Mm.
act towards that. You don't
Right.
wait to feel like you're that, but you act towards it.
That's cool. I think Laura talks about that too.
I do.
She particularly around, I think more of like lifestyle choices, right? Like working out and eating. Like, how do I want to feel later?
Hmm.
Well, even in leadership, and like I use a lot of the language around like if you're the CEO of your own mind, and one of the, let's say, anger or resentment is having a big old hissy fit at the conference table, like how do you want to respond as the CEO of your own mind to something you're experiencing? Because we're so conditioned to be like, you shouldn't feel this, push this away. I don't know what to do with this, so I'm gonna distract, numb, avoid, whatever it's gonna be. But the energy doesn't go anywhere, and then you're just kind of stuck in this like stressed out space. But if you have clarity about how you want to treat yourself or who you want to be to yourself, it gives you an easier path because you know where you want to go versus only knowing what you don't want.
You have a direction.
Right. Yeah.
Well, this has been fun. So thank
So
you so much for joining us today. And what is this magical website that you have where we
nice.
can find you?
Yeah.
So actually, there are two that may fit for people because we've talked about two different pieces. So I always talk about, you get married and you jump on the boat together, right? And you're headed down the river together and you're going, oh, this is great. And then you suddenly become aware that you're hearing, the waterfall in the distance. And the question is whether you are at the lip of the waterfall when you figure that out or upstream where you're like, we could do something different now. So I created an app. It's the Unpause app, and it's for when you're upstream, when you're not on the lip of it. And it's an app that goes on your phone to help you work through. It's got trainings in it, and it's got lots of tools and different things. But it also has an exercise morning and evening to help you become more of who you want to be. And what I like about it as an app is it will remind you because you're changing habits. That's part of that process of changing habits. And so it'll let you know that it's time to do that. Then that's at unpauseyourmarriage.com. So Unpause Your Marriage is the app. Unpauseyourmarriage.com is where you find it. But if you realize that you are on the lip, like there is that it's coming at you, then that's at Save the Marriage. That's the Save the Marriage system at savethemarriage.com.
Oh, cool. So when did you add unpause to it? We know the
Back,
first one was 1999, so now I'm
yeah,
curious.
back in November of last year, so pretty
Oh,
recently.
it's new. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
we built it up.
exciting. Okay, that's super cool. And I love the idea of an app that reminds you of things.
Mm.
So that's super cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Finally, a
Well, you
notification that helps.
Yes, right?
yeah.
Because of course we would forget. It's not something that we would normally do.
Right.
Um, yeah, so thank you for your wisdom today. Thank you for your time. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for being understanding when I couldn't figure out my volume.
No worries.
Yeah, thank you for everything you're contributing, not just in the podcast, but also to try and help people love each other better.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for your works too.
All right, well, we will be following up with you online and thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.